Chapter 32. Now, there are plenty of ways to wake up. There are good wake ups, like when you drift out of sleep slow and easy and wake up curled up all warm with your cat. There's waking up on Christmas and waking up on your birthday and waking up to the smell of bacon cooking. All good wake ups. And then there are bad wake ups. Rodeo waking up with Ivan clawing him bloody and me reaching for his neck comes to mind. And there's waking up vomiting. I did that once when I got food poisoning from eating a buffalo burger in Texas. Not great. But I gotta say that the afternoon after I broke up with Tammy, I discovered a whole new level of bad wake up. As far as I know, there is no worse way to wake up than on a speeding, out of control bus full of people screaming and crying and begging for their lives. I was sound asleep when it all started. I was snoozing along quite happily when someone screaming, "Help us, Jesus!" kind of half woke me up, and then a whole bunch of screams. Some religious, some secular. All the way woke me up, and by the time I could gasp and jerk upright, I could hear all kinds of hollering and blubbering and wailing, and the bus was shaking under and around me. Then the bus lurched wildly to the side, nearly tossing me to the floor, and I tell you, I just about peed the bed. I jumped up and ran right out through my curtain to see that all hell had broken loose on board old Jaeger. It was still bright in the afternoon, which was fortunate, so the whole terrifying scene was well lit, if nothing else. We were heading down a hill, and it was a steep downhill, too. All around us were big, pine-dotted brown hills. The trees were blurry on account of the fact that we were herding along at, 200 miles an hour. Not really, of course. But in Jaeger, anything over about 60 feels like 200, and we were definitely over 60. Concepcion was at the wheel. Even from the back of the bus, I could see her fingers in a tight death grip on the wheel, her shoulders hunched and rigid. She was doing the most consistent screaming, a high-pitched, screeching, repetitive sort of wail like a siren. Rodeo was crouched on the floor next to her, pointing at things and hollering and being not at all his normal laid-back self. Lester was up behind Rodeo and Concepcion, and he was shouting and pointing and carrying on just like Rodeo was. A gray blur came tearing toward me. I realized it was Ivan, ears back and eyes huge and fur standing up. I thought he was running to me, but he rocketed right through my legs and dove under my bed. Fair enough. Before I could take in the rest of the scene, Jaeger did another dramatic sideways swerve that tumbled me to the floor with a breath-snatching oof. I shook my head and pushed myself up to my hands and knees, keeping my legs and hands spread wide for balance. Standing upright seemed like a foolish and short-term proposition, so I started crawling up toward the front of the bus, passing my fellow passengers in a tour of terror along the way. First, I passed Miss Vega. She was bracing herself on the couch, her eyes closed and her lips moving in what I'm guessing was a prayer. She was far too busy pleading her case to the Lord to notice me slinking past her. Next came Val, sitting stiff and wide-eyed in the throne. She was screaming, too. Well, not so much screaming as wailing, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," with tears streaming down her cheeks. I crept past her and into the aisle between the seats. Salvador was kind of surfing in the middle of the aisle, standing up but bent low, holding on to the seats on both sides, screaming his head off. Not words so much as sounds, though if they had been words, I bet they would have been words I wouldn't want to repeat in front of my grandma. Jaeger careened violently to the side again so hard it knocked me down to my elbows. Books avalanched off shelves, and I heard at least one tomato plant bust loose and crash to the floor. "What's going on?" I screamed as I pulled myself up to one knee and braced myself against a seat. Salvador's head swiveled back to me. His eyes were like ping-pong balls. "Coyote!" he shrieked. Then he was way past trying to act tough at all. "Stay down! What's going on?" And then Salvador told me. Now, just like waking up, news can be good and news can be bad, or news can be flat out terrible. Well, Salvador gave me some news that was definitely in the last category. The brakes went out. We're out of control. I hadn't eaten a buffalo burger in about 2 years, but I just about vomited when Salvador gave me that news. I eyed Rodeo way up at the front, trying to help Concepcion however he could. I started crawling forward again, rocking with the movement of the bus. Salvador had his legs spread wide, and I crawled right through them, hoping that he wasn't as close to peeing his pants as I was. "What are you doing?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out, so I kept crawling. The truth is, I was freaking terrified. My stomach was somersaulting, and my muscles were shaking, and my lungs were heaving, and my heart was drumming, and my eyes were blurry, and I wanted my dad. I just wanted my dad. I wasn't allowed to say that, though, that D word. That's a no-go. So I kept my mouth shut and crawled up behind Rodeo. He looked back over his shoulder and saw me coming up behind him. "Hold on, honey bird," he shouted, "and stay down." He turned his eyes back to the front, and I did the same. Almost wished I hadn't. We were flying down that highway. We were passing cars left and right, which is where all the lurching and swerving was coming from. They had no way of knowing we had no brakes, so they didn't bother pulling to the side when we came up behind them. And then Concepcion would have had to cut the wheel and careen around them, honking the whole way, try to warn them. It must have been something for them, driving down the road, minding their own business, when out of nowhere a rattling old school bus full of screaming people roared by them like a drag racer. Yeah, we got a few looks. I wasn't worried about the looks, though. I was worried about the two semis in front of us, one in each lane, blocking our whole side of the highway. We were coming up on them fast. "Guys," Concepcion asked between shrieks, "any ideas? What should I do?" "Lay on the horn," Lester shouted. And even though Concepcion had already been honking it, she switched to just holding it down in one long, desperate honk. But the trucks either didn't hear us or couldn't adjust in time. They were exactly side by side, with only like a foot of space between them. "How about the oncoming lane?" Rodeo hollered, and Concepcion drifted across the yellow highway line. But then she yelped and cut back hard into our lane, just in time to avoid a line of cars coming the other way. "No good!" she screamed. "Too much traffic!" The trucks were close now. In 4 seconds, we were going to smash into them. "Help me, Jesus!" Concepcion screamed skyward. Then she yanked the steering wheel the other way, to the right. We roared across one lane, and my heart jumped into my neck when I saw what she was doing. She steered Jaeger right onto the shoulder of the road, all the way over so that our right wheels were grumbling and crunching through the weeds and dirt. And we missed the back corner of the semi by what looked like, I swear to God, about half an inch. Jaeger was really bouncing and shaking now, and a fresh round of screaming and crying and praying erupted behind us. Thanks to our unreasonable and horrifying speed, we didn't have to spend too much time driving on the shoulder, which I suppose was a silver lining to the whole nightmare. Once we cleared the semi, Concepcion veered us back onto the asphalt. "There!" Rodeo cried, pointing out the front windshield, and we all saw it in the distance, the highway flattening out, leveling out to a nice long straightaway. Salvation. Between us and that, though, there was still at least a mile of road, plenty of traffic, and one decently sharp turn to the left. "You got it," Lester breathed out, reaching to squeeze Concepcion's shoulder. "You're doing great." We weaved left, we weaved right, splitting the traffic and racing our way toward that blessed flat stretch up ahead. We came up to the curve, all 4 lanes of highway bending off to the left. We were in the left lane, and it was wide open in front of us. We were going to make it. We just had to take the curve, pass a couple of cars, and then coast to a stop. But then, there's almost always a but then. A car in front of us, one that was over in the right lane and not causing any problems, decided to pass the car in front of it, which meant, of course, that it pulled over into the left lane. You know, the one that we were rocketing down. Lester said a couple words I won't repeat, but with which I totally agreed. Concepcion cut to the right, going for her insane shoulder trick again. I mean, it had worked before, hadn't it? But before, there hadn't been a van parked on the shoulder, up on a jack and missing a tire. There were a few more bad words from the crowd up front, possibly even including me. We cut back to the left, but both of our lanes were taken. We all knew what she had to do. I shouted, "Help us, Jesus!" so Concepcion could focus on the driving. We drifted into the next lane over, the one where cars were supposed to be heading the other way. It was clear. There was a red pickup truck coming our way, but it was a ways off. At our speed, it looked like we'd be able to pass the car and get back on the right side before we met that pickup. "You got this, Concepcion!" Rodeo cheered. We pulled up beside the car we were passing at the same time it was passing the car next to it. Our hood passed its taillights, then its rear doors, then its driver, who was glancing down at his cell phone and didn't even notice us sneaking past him in our gigantic bright yellow school bus. Then our nose was past its hood, and it was sliding on back behind us. We had it. But then we hit another but then, of course. That red pickup was getting closer. "Get over," Rodeo said. "I can't," Concepcion said between clenched teeth. "Get over," Lester said. "I can't," Concepcion snarled. "We're not past him yet. We're not passing him at all." All 3 of our heads swiveled to see what she was seeing in her rear view mirror. The car with the cell phone driver was not receding safely into the distance behind us. It was holding steady right next to us. "Is he speeding up?" I demanded. "No," Lester answered. "We're slowing down." It was true. We'd hit the bottom of the hill. The slope was fading away, and so was our madhouse speed. "Hit the gas!" I screamed. And after all that stress about going too fast and wishing we could stop, Concepcion floored the gas pedal. Jaeger's engine revved high in protest, but it answered the call. We surged forward. The cell phone car dropped back to our rear. The red pickup was cruising toward our front. Concepcion gave the rearview mirror one last check and then jerked the wheel hard to the right. We barreled out of the path and back into our own lane, and she kept going into the far right lane and took her foot off the gas. And we rolled a little less fast and a little less fast, and then there was a highway exit with a nice long steep uphill ramp. She took it, and we rolled even slower up the slope. And when we were rolling along at like bicycle speed, she pulled off onto the shoulder, and then, thank God, we came to a sweet, sweet stop. Concepcion grabbed the gear shift and clicked us into park and yanked up on the parking brake. She turned the key and killed the engine. We all sat or stood or crouched there for a few seconds, breathing and panting and slowing our hearts back down to a more survivable speed. Rodeo straightened up. He blew out a big breath. He turned back to the rest of us. I could still hear Miss Vega praying and Val sniffling. His eyes went from person to person as the color slowly came back to his face. They settled on me and his eyebrows dropped, and he grabbed a blanket off a seat and handed it to me. "Wrap this round yourself, little bird," he said quietly. And I realized that I'd come running out in such a hurry that I'd neglected to check my clothing situation. I was wearing nothing but a t-shirt and my underwear in front of Salvador and the whole world, which at any other time would have made me about 6 different kinds of mortified. But at that moment I was alive and just grateful to be so. So I just took the blanket and kind of tied it around my waist and didn't worry one bit about it. I glanced back at Salvador, but he was looking very conspicuously away from me and out the window, which I thought was very gentlemanly and honorable. Rodeo wedged a shaken little half-smile onto his face. "Well," he said, "we're making good time. Anyone else need a bathroom break?"